So this was the final week of the semester, and we wrapped it up by learning a little bit more about deck design and construction, and then also doing our final deck design, which I'll show you here in a minute. Just some things we went over following up from last week. We kind of talked about what makes a deck fail. So you may see on YouTube or somewhere else on the internet where a deck, a lot of people are standing on a deck and then it just kind of breaks and falls apart, which isn't good, and it's definitely not what you want, especially if you are professionally doing that. So we kind of talked about some things to look for to make sure that your deck is sturdy and good, especially if you're maybe moving into a house that already has a deck. You want to look to see if it's good enough to hold what you're going to put on it, or if you need to replace it, or what you need to do. So first thing you need to look for is loose connections. On the beams and the joists and the decking, can you wiggle it free? Is it pretty sturdy? And so if there's loose connections, that means that things weren't screwed in right, or things are loose and they need to be adjusted. Missing hardware is the second one. And I talked last week, or in the last video, about the different straps and ties that go into connecting the joists to the beams, and the beams to the posts, and the posts to the footing, and also the decking to the joists. And there's a bunch of things that are used to connect the wood all together to hold the deck together and make it stronger. And so if you're missing that hardware and there's nothing but nails and screws in it, then that's kind of a problem, because just nails and screws won't hold the deck together very well. Corroded hardware is the third thing to look for, and even if there is hardware, you got to make sure it's not corroded, because over time things will start to rust and wear and tear. So looking for that. Another thing that's very important is rotted wood. It seems kind of obvious. Rotted wood leads to failure of the wood and in its strength. So if the wood is rotted, then it will give out under pressure and it won't be as strong, and also just doesn't look good. A lot of times people may even paint over rotted wood just to give it a new look, and so you can't even notice. But it's rotted when it's very soft, it's falling apart, you can easily break it apart, and things like that. So you definitely want to check for that, especially in the posts, because you don't want the posts to give out and then the whole deck comes apart, because that's what's holding the deck together. And it's also more common in the posts to rot, especially if you put the posts in the concrete instead of having them elevated by post base saddles. So it's important to look for that in posts and other parts of the deck. The last is cracked wood, which can happen to nobody's fault, but nature happening. If a board undergoes a lot of strain, it could crack, or if maybe it dries too much, it could crack, could split along the grain. So you want to check for split wood, because that could also lead to failure. Kind of like the rotted wood, it could lead to failure of the structure, and then that's not good. So kind of getting into the deck design, last week I showed some pictures of what we were doing, just kind of measuring out, using that handbook to figure out what size posts and joists and beams to use and all that wood. And so, because there's a lot of math and detail that goes into it, because decks are holding up a lot of people, and it's important, you don't want them to fail. So here's kind of my Vistera model of my design that I made, and we were given the parameters of like the building and the doors being 4 feet off the ground. There's the river going underneath the deck. You can see the posts, the footing, the beams, and then the joists. And you can see that there's a lot more joists than beams, and that's because the joists are what hold up the decking, and there's a lot of decking. You can see as well the footing is cement that goes into the ground, and the post is on top of the footing. And then there are the joists. Along the wall here, it's not in the Vistera model, but That's the ledger board, and that's the board that connects the joist to the house. And so you don't always have to have a ledger board, but it's you can have one. And when you use a ledger board, you use lag screws to actually screw the ledger board into the house, and then the whole foundation of the house acts as the posts and the footing, instead of a post and footing. So this is another way to just kind of aesthetically make it pleasing and save money on concrete and things like that. And overall, that was my Vistera model, and you can see this is kind of the plan view of the model, and that's just the framing. So I have everything labeled, I have it all drawn out, measured, I have dimensions there, and that's just so that it can be constructed if someone was to want to construct that design. I also have a section elevation drawing of a post, and you can see in the picture the concrete goes about 3 feet in, and that's so that it holds the decking up. You don't want the footing to go just a few inches into the soil, because it could easily be ripped up by wind, by erosion, things like that. So you can see as well, I have the rest of the deck kind of labeled out on that. And then I have a materials list. It's very simple, just kind of how much wood did I use. I don't have prices or anything like that, but just this is how many boards you need, this is the length, the size, things like that. And then to kind of finish off the week, we had a kind of a fun appetizer Friday, finished our designs, reviewed for the test that's that we had as well, our final test, and that was just a cumulative test of everything we've learned in the semester, which, you know, I think everyone did well on. So overall, it was a good final week to the semester and to the class that we've been learning so much about landscape construction and things like that. I really appreciate our professor, Skylar Westergaard, for being such a great teacher and really doing his best to help us learn the principles. And I know what we've learned is pretty basic. It's not enough to go out and, you know, say we're licensed in lighting and water features and things like that. But, you know, it's a really good experience getting a little bit of hands-on training and really being submersed into the subject. So I appreciate that, and I love the class, and I appreciate everyone for watching, and hope you have enjoyed.